This is the story of Kamran Siddiqui and his wife, Zara Siddiqui. They had been married for 11 years, long enough that their silences had developed their own grammar. Cameron was a civil engineer who believed in structure and load-bearing walls, and foundations measured twice before being poured. Zara was a marketing consultant who had learned early in her career that the right framing could make almost anything beautiful. Their marriage had been, for most of its life, a quiet and functional thing, not unhappy, but no longer surprised by itself. The tension between them was not the sharp kind that draws blood. It was the dull kind, the kind that accumulates in rooms where two people stop asking each other questions they genuinely want answered. What would unravel them was not a single betrayal, but the slow, particular way that Zara had begun to need to feel chosen, and the equally slow, particular way that Kamran had stopped choosing her out loud. The dinner table on a Tuesday was always the same. Rice, something with lentils or chicken, the television on but muted. A habit Kamran had started during a cricket match 3 years ago and never reversed. Zara would sit across from him with her phone face down on the table, which meant either that she was being present or that she was hiding something, and for a long time Kamran had chosen to believe it was the former. Santa called, she said, meaning her colleague. They want me in Lahore Thursday through Sunday. Again, the Horizon campaign is in final rounds. She spooned lentils without looking up. It's not optional. Kamran nodded. This was the third trip in 6 weeks. He had noticed the pattern not with suspicion exactly, but with the dull arithmetic of a man who knows something doesn't add up, but hasn't yet decided what to do with the knowledge. Their daughter Mira, 9 years old, was at her grandmother's for the week. The house felt different when Mira wasn't in it, larger and slightly unconvincing, like a set built for a play that had ended. "I'll manage," Kamran said. It was the sort of sentence that sounds like acceptance, but is shaped like a question. Zara finally looked up. She had a specific way of looking at him these days, direct, slightly preemptive, as if anticipating an accusation she planned to dismiss before it arrived. "I know you will," she said. After dinner, Kamran washed the dishes. He did this every night. It was the kind of detail no one writes in wedding speeches. The man who washed the dishes because he noticed Zara's hands dried out from soap, who had therefore quietly absorbed the task in the first year of marriage and simply never stopped. He didn't think of it as sacrifice. He thought of it as maintenance, the way you maintain a structure you want to last. He heard her on the phone in the bedroom. The door was not quite closed. He couldn't make out words, only the texture of her voice, softer than it was at the dinner table, lighter. He stood at the sink with wet hands and listened to that lightness and felt something he couldn't name, something that lived between concern and recognition. He turned off the tap, dried his hands. He knocked on the bedroom door, which he had never needed to do before in his own home, and understood in the knock itself that something had shifted. "Come in," she said, and when he entered she was sitting on the bed, phone already in her lap, her face rearranged into something neutral. "Mira called?" he asked. "No. Sana, about the itinerary." "Okay." He changed out of his work clothes and they went to bed, and she read something on her phone, and he stared at the ceiling, and outside a car alarm went off down the street and was silenced. And neither of them said anything about the silence between them, because in 11 years they had both become very skilled at not naming things. He fell asleep thinking about load-bearing walls, about the specific way a structure could appear sound while a fracture moved through it imperceptibly, not through the wall itself, but through the material underneath, through the thing the wall was standing on. It was the last thought he had before sleep, that some cracks don't appear on the surface until the surface is already gone. By the time Zara returned from her third Lahore trip, Kamran had developed a new habit. In the evenings after dinner, he would sit on the small balcony off the kitchen with a cup of tea he barely drank and look at the street below. He couldn't have explained what he was looking for. The act of watching without purpose was itself new to him. A man who scheduled his Saturdays in half-hour blocks, who kept a maintenance log for the apartment, who had once been called by his mother-in-law the most organized person she had ever loved. Zara noticed the balcony habit without commenting on it. She noticed most things about Kamran without commenting on them. This had been, in the early years of their marriage, a form of intimacy, the particular pleasure of knowing someone so well that their behavior was legible to you. Lately, it felt like something else, more like surveillance, more like the way you monitor a situation you're waiting to change. Her colleague, the one behind the Lahore trips, was named Farhan Malik, 36, recently divorced, lead strategist on the Horizon account. Zara had mentioned him twice to Kamran in passing, the way you mention things you want on record. Farhan thinks the Horizon pitch needs a stronger emotional hook. Farhan was in Dubai before this. He has a different way of thinking about consumer trust. Kamran had listened both times and said, in the way that meant he was filing the name away rather than discarding it. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the third Lahore trip, Kamran was cleaning the study, his territory, his bookshelves, his drafting table, and found himself holding Zara's secondary phone charger, which had migrated in here and been plugged into the wall behind the desk. The phone itself was not attached. He looked at the charger for a long moment, then set it on the desk and continued cleaning. That evening she was cooking. She cooked on Saturdays. He cooked the rest of the week. Another unspoken division they'd arrived at naturally, and he stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her and tried to locate, inside himself, whatever it was he was supposed to feel. "You seem far away," she said, without turning from the stove. "Do I? You've been like this for weeks." He leaned against the doorframe. "What do I seem like?" She paused, spatula in hand, like you're waiting for something. He didn't respond immediately. The oil in the pan made small sounds. Mira was in the living room watching something with headphones on. "Maybe I am," he said. Zara turned then, and her expression was complicated. Not quite guilty, not quite defensive, but something in between, something that had the architecture of anticipation. She was, Kamran realized, also waiting for something. They were both waiting, but not for the same thing. She was waiting to see whether he would ask. He was waiting to see whether she would tell him without being asked. Neither happened. She turned back to the stove. He went to sit with Mira. The dinner was good. He told her so. Later that night, when Zara was in the bathroom and her phone buzzed on the nightstand, Kamran looked at the screen without touching it. The preview showed only the sender name and 2 words of a message before it locked. The sender name was FM. The 2 words were, "Miss you." He read them twice. Then he placed his book face down on his chest and looked at the ceiling. And what he felt was not rage. It was something quieter and more structural, like the sound a building makes before it lists. Not a crack, but a sigh. The sound of weight redistributing. He was still looking at the ceiling when Zara came back and got into bed and said goodnight and turned away from him. "Good night," he said. He waited 10 days before saying anything, not because he was afraid of the answer, but because he needed to be certain, not of her guilt, which he had already privately accepted, but of himself, of how he wanted to be in the room when it happened. He had seen men become loud in these moments, become brittle and theatrical, and he had always found it puzzling, as though volume were a substitute for comprehension. He chose a Sunday afternoon when Mira was at a birthday party. He made tea for both of them, set the cups on the coffee table, and sat down. Zara came in from the bedroom and saw the 2 cups and stopped. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She wrapped her hands around her cup without drinking from it. He didn't build up to it. "Farhan Malik," he said. The name landed and she closed her eyes for 1 second, barely perceptible, the duration of a single breath. And when she opened them, her expression was the particular expression of someone who has been caught, but is not yet ready to confess. "Cameron, I'm not asking you to explain it right now," he said. "I'm asking you whether it's real." A long silence. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. "It's not. It isn't what you think it is," she said. But even as she said it, something in her face seemed to hear the inadequacy of the words. "Then what is it?" She looked at her tea. "I haven't done anything." "Not the way you mean." "I'm not interested in categories," Kamran said. He said it gently. That was the strange thing she would remember later. How gentle he was. I'm interested in whether it meant something. The silence was different this time. Heavier. He listens, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. He asks me things. He remembers things I say. She stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like something that should have been us, Cameron said. She looked up at him, and in her eyes there was something complicated. The beginnings of grief, but also, beneath it, a faint relief, as though she had been carrying the weight of an unsaid thing and had set it down, even improperly, even in the wrong room. I tried to tell you I needed more, she said. When? A year ago, 2 years ago, in ways you didn't hear. He considered this. He knew it was partly true. He was a man who had loved Zara in practical ways, in dishes washed, in schedules kept, in reliability so complete it had become invisible. He had confused constancy with presence. He could see that now, and it made him sad, though the sadness was not enough to change what had already happened. Did you sleep with him? He asked. She shook her head. He believed her. But you wanted to. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He picked up his tea and drank from it and set it back down. I think I need to sleep in the study for now, he said. Not as punishment, just I need the space. Cameron, we can talk about this. We are talking, he said. This is us talking, but I can't talk through it in one afternoon. He stood. I need you to stop contact with him. I think you know that. She nodded, but he noticed the slight hesitation before the nod, and he filed that away too. He went to the study. He sat at his drafting table and looked at his hands and thought about structural integrity, about how engineers calculated the moment at which a material had passed its elastic limit, the point after which it could not return to its original shape even when the load was removed. He had always found the concept useful and cold. He thought about it for a long time. 7 months passed. They had not separated. This surprised some people. Kamran's friend Bilal, who knew pieces of the story, and Kamran's sister Rahila, who knew more than Kamran realized. People expected a decision, a departure, a finality. Instead, there was something harder to name, a marriage continuing like a conversation that both people had become too tired to end, but neither could continue freely. They were civil with each other. For Mira's sake, they told each other, and this was true, but not entirely. There was also the truth that Kamran did not know how to leave a thing he had spent 11 years building, and the other truth that Zara had not fully let go of Farhan, who had moved back to Dubai but who sent messages. She answered with diminishing frequency and increasing guilt. She had told herself in the weeks after the confrontation that she had chosen correctly, that she had stepped back from the edge, had preserved what could be preserved. She framed the story in her mind with herself as a woman who had been seduced by attention she wasn't receiving at home, who had recognized the danger before it was too late, who had made the harder choice. It was not an entirely dishonest story, but it left out certain things. The longing she still felt when Farhan's name appeared on her screen. The specific effort it cost her not to answer fully. The way she had let Kamran believe the contact had ended when it had only slowed. Kamran, meanwhile, had changed in ways that were difficult to describe. He was not cruel. He was not distant in the loud, punishing way. He was simply present differently, more contained. He asked about her work with genuine interest, but he no longer volunteered his own thoughts unasked. He cooked 4 nights a week as he always had, but he had stopped making her coffee in the mornings without being asked. Small things. The architecture of the small things. One evening, Mira asked Zara why Baba seemed different. Different how? Zara said. Quieter? Mira said. Like he's thinking about something. Zara said Baba was just tired from a big project. Mira accepted this and went back to her homework, and Zara sat with the word quieter and felt its particular weight. She began slowly to want the marriage back, not in the way she had wanted it before. She had not much wanted it before, which was part of how they had arrived here, but in a new way, a sharper way, shaped by loss. She began initiating small intimacies. She would bring him tea on the balcony. She would sit next to him when they watched television, instead of at the far end of the sofa. She would ask about the project he was designing for a new infrastructure corridor in Maltan. And when he talked about it, she would listen with her full attention. Kamran received these gestures carefully. He was not immune to them. He was still, beneath everything, a man who loved his wife in the only way he knew how, completely, and in the language of presence. But he had also become someone who understood the difference between a return and a retreat. He was watching to see which this was. In March, he found the last few messages from Farhan on her phone, not by going through it. She had left it unlocked on the counter, and a notification appeared, and he read it in the half second before it locked. The message was from 2 weeks ago. Her response to it, visible in the thread, was warm. Not explicit, but warm. He said nothing that night. He cooked dinner. He helped Mira with her math homework. He watched the muted television and drank his tea. But something in him had settled. The way sediment settles in still water, quietly, finally, without drama. He planned it for a dinner. A Thursday night, Mira at his mother's, a meal he cooked himself, lamb with herbs, rice, the good glasses out. Zara came home from work and saw the table and stopped in the kitchen doorway. "What's the occasion?" she said, and her voice had a hopefulness in it that cost him something to hear. "Sit down," he said. "I made dinner." They ate for a while without speaking, the way they used to in the early years, companionably, without pressure. She told him about a campaign pitch. He asked a question or two. The food was good. After they'd finished, he reached into the chair beside him and placed an envelope on the table between them. She looked at it. "What is this?" "Open it." She did. She unfolded the papers inside slowly, and as she read, the color in her face changed. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, but the small, specific way that understanding moves through a person when they encounter something they were not ready to receive. They were the papers for the Moulton property, his name, and beside it a line with her name removed. Not a punishment exactly, a clarification. He had spent 6 weeks quietly restructuring what was his from what was theirs, in the methodical way of a man who believes in foundations. "I've been in contact with a lawyer," he said. "Not to fight. I'm not interested in fighting." She set the papers down. She was very still. "The Farhan messages," she said, not a question. "Yes, I was going to stop Sarah." His voice was not cold. It was something more precise than cold. It was the voice of a man who had arrived somewhere and was simply reporting what he found there. "I believe that you believe that." She looked at him, and in her eyes there was a question she was afraid to ask. "I'm not angry," he said. "I was for a while, but what I feel now is mostly tired. Not of you. Tired of watching both of us pretend that what we have now is the same as what we had, or that it will become what we had if we wait long enough." "We could try," she said. Her voice was very careful. "Properly, with someone, a counselor." "Maybe we should have," he said. "2 years ago, when you said you needed more, and I didn't hear you. I think about that." He did not say it with self-pity. He said it with the particular flatness of a man acknowledging a structural error. "But I needed you to choose me, not because there was no other option, because you wanted to. And I think that distinction mattered more to me than I ever told you." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary evening things. A vendor calling, a motorcycle passing, the neighborhood in its habitual noise. "I'm sorry," she said, and it was different from the sorry she had said 7 months ago, less defensive, more stripped. She meant it this time without qualification, and they both knew it, and it changed nothing, and also wasn't nothing. "I know," he said. He poured them each a glass of water. He didn't know why. It was a small, absurd gesture, but they both drank from their glasses, and it seemed to complete something. They talked for another hour, practically mostly. Mira, the apartment, the logistics of an uncoupling made of 11 years. They talked like two people who had once known each other very well and were now carefully learning to know each other as something else, as people on opposite sides of a thing that had already happened, doing the quiet work of not making it worse. When she went to bed, she paused at the hallway. "The dinner was good," she said. "You always liked the lamb." She nodded. She went down the hall. Kamran stayed at the table for a while after. He looked at the empty glasses, the folded papers, the small aftermath of a meal. He thought about what he had told her, that he had needed to be chosen. He thought about how long he had gone without saying it out loud, how much he had communicated instead through presence, through maintenance, through the silent accumulation of a love that he had trusted would be legible. It occurred to him that he had made a structural error of his own. He turned off the kitchen light and went to stand on the balcony. The street below was thinning into late night. The air was cool and carried the smell of something faintly green, something alive underneath the city's ordinary exhaust. He stood there for a long time without checking his phone, without making a list, without planning the next thing, just standing in the particular silence of a man who has finally said the truest thing he knew, not to save the house, but because the house had already changed around him, and it was time, at last, to see it clearly.